For those of you who are joining us for the first time, thank you very much. This is the first Native Creatives events, hopefully the first of many that we have planned for the next year. Native Creatives is a Festival Bridge-led programme which is designed to support teachers of the creative arts with their personal and creative practice. So it came after a really successful mental health and wellbeing programme that Festival Bridge organised last October. And we discovered that there was quite a gap in supporting the creative and cultural lives of our creative arts teachers and our primary arts leads. And we wanted to develop a programme where we could nurture those creative lives and to provide an opportunity for teachers to connect with peers, connect with artists and arts organisations, whilst also fueling their creative passion and practice. So whilst this is not a CPD opportunity, we want it to be more about a connecting opportunity, about developing your creative practice and to help kind of bridge that gap between you as an artist and you as a educator. It might be that you don't have a practice, you're not a visual artist, a painter, a dancer or a performer. It might be just that you have a passion for engaging with arts and culture and you want to establish a way to connect the two, as Pat Thompson just said, a hybrid practice between yourself as an artist and yourself as an educator. So that's where Native Creatives comes from. At the end of the session, we are going to have a Jamboard, which we'll post in the chat box, which we would really like you to just say one thing, really positive thing, if you can think of something, that you're going to take away from this session. I'm going to introduce our second speaker in a moment and she will do her talk, and then hopefully there'll be some time for a Q&A at the end. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our second speaker, who is Suba Subramaniam, which I'm sure I've said her surname wrong, and I've already apologised to her in advance. Suba is the Artistic Director for Academy Dance Company. Their mission is to develop artists, inspire audiences and enhance lives by creating, commissioning and nurturing classical, contemporary, popular and participatory South Asian dance in the UK. Suba is one of the UK's leading choreographers and educators working at the confluence of dance, culture and science, having spent over 20 years as Artistic Director of two of the UK's pioneering South Asian dance companies, Anjika and Sadhana Dance. Suba started her training in classical Indian dance in Malaysia at the Temple of Fine Arts and continued in London at the Bhavan as a qualified science teacher with a master's degree in education and PGCE in science. Her dual training in Indian dance and science puts her in a unique position and is highly respected within the UK's dance and scientific communities. Suba has been an artist in residence at a number of organisations around the world. During her time with Anjika, she choreographed and performed in all the company's duet and ensemble works, touring both nationally and internationally. She's regularly asked to speak at international conferences, including the British Council in Thailand, Cuba, Canada and Egypt, and the International Public Engagement Conference for the Wellcome Trust in Mumbai. Suba took over as Artistic Director at Academy in January 2020, and I'm absolutely delighted that she has agreed to join us today to talk about her journey through creativity and through education. So over to you, Suba.
Thank you. That was such a great intro. I forgot that that was in my bio. I haven't heard a bio for so long. But thank you for inviting me. So for the next half hour, I thought I would share my sort of creative journey and also how that sort of has sat totally sort of coinciding with my sort of journey as a teacher in a classroom in comprehensive schools and how that sort of fed, well, they've both fed my sort of creative practice. And if there's anything I can share that might help any of you looking to create, you know, to keep that creative practice alive, and also for me, how it fed into my teaching. So I thought I would start by just sharing with you my kind of background. So I did my PGCE in '97 and have been for the last sort of 20 years, always been involved in education in some way. So I taught at a state school in Croydon in South London for about 5 years full-time as my first teaching post, and then for 2 years part-time. And all during that time, I was I was a dancer and had just set up a dance company called Angika with another South Asian dance colleague. So I was literally teaching all day. I would finish a full day's teaching, I would do my planning, and then I would drive like a nutcase to the studio to try and work on the piece or choreographing or whatever it is we'd be doing over a period of time. And this kind of went on for ages, and then somehow my shows just happened to sort of fit at weekends. And then it got to a point after about 5 years of doing that, that there was nothing left of me, but more than anything else, it got to the point where we were starting to tour prolifically around the country, which was fantastic for us, but something had to give. And that's the point at which I stopped teaching. And then I started to be a dancer. And then all the way through, even when I wasn't in a classroom teaching science, which is my PhD and my background, I was still doing workshops. So the education part of my life has kind of always existed. So I was either doing dance workshops or teaching science. So I've taught, I don't know how many schools I've been to up and down the country doing dance workshops, universities, sixth form colleges. So all of the time, the dance was kind of feeding into sort of my passion in education. And I was always teaching and sharing that process. And I talked a lot about the process of creating work with sort of university students and college students, and looked at how we use South Asian dance within their practice. And I've done a lot of inset days with teachers as well to share process and to give teachers working with dance, sort of South Asian dance as a tool to use like any language. But all the way through all of that work or through teaching, I've also been really, really fortunate. So in about 2003, I was invited to take part in a project called Cape Farewell. And it's a project that brings together artists, scientists, educators, journalists to raise awareness about climate change. So I'm going to share my screen and share my sort of Cape Farewell journey with you guys. So this project, I'm going to show a nice pretty picture. This project was very much about raising awareness about climate change, but looking at the world through both the arts and the science lens. So in 2003, when I was invited to go along with this project, bizarrely that contact came from a dance programmer at the Place Theatre in London, who knew that I was a science teacher. And she said, "You're interested in science, you dance, and there's this project, and I think you'd be right, you know, it'd be right up your street. Plus you're a science teacher, it'd be really interesting," because they'd had some funding from Nesta to look at creating science and geography curriculum as part of this voyage. So we went on a boat, a wooden Dutch lightship, and it was a sailboat. So we sailed from northern Norway, a place called Tromsø, right up to Svalbard in northern Norway. Now, I was born and brought up in Malaysia at 32 degrees Celsius. I was always warm for the first 13 years of my life. And then suddenly someone said, "Would you like to go to the Arctic, where that's the scenery and it's freezing cold and you'll be seasick and you'll be helping to sail a boat," all of which you'll be doing alongside being a teacher, because we really would love you to present a whole load of science work for possible curriculum that we're going to create, and for the geography A-level curriculum around landscapes and climate. So we were literally had a film crew on board. We had a load of scientists doing some real science. They were from the Southampton Oceanography Centre, and a bunch of artists who literally, we had Gary Hume, who was a previous Turner Prize nominee, all the way through to David Hinton, who's a world-renowned filmmaker, to all sorts of visual artists, choreographers. We had, I mean, the most incredible group of 20 people. And we sailed to places. Now, that was the first trip. Since then, I've been really fortunate all the way through to have been up to the Arctic with this project 5 times. And on one of the times, it was minus 35 degrees when we arrived in Nunavut in Canada. And it all stemmed from us organizing a voyage for young people. So a lot of the time, when I talk about feeding creativity and talk about how that creative practice has always kind of filtered through to the children, to the young people I've taught, to the young people I've interacted with, to the point where after the 2003 voyage in 2007, myself and an educator I was working with who's now a filmmaker, we thought about what it would be like to take young people and give them the same experience we'd had. How could we take all these elements of creativity? So we had scientists, we had artists on board. We wanted the young people to see the world through both lenses, but the world around climate change and all the stuff that we'd experienced. So they did real science and they did real art. So it wasn't about just experience, but it was about sharing that creativity. And for me, what I experienced in all of these years, between sort of 2003 and 2008, which was the last voyage I was on, continues to feed my practice today. Even though I'm not teaching in a classroom and I'm now artistic director of an organization, all of this work still feeds it, because the reason I work and I took over as artistic director of the current organization is primarily because of their learning and participation program and how much learning and education is embedded within everything that we do creatively. So, you know, one of the projects that we're hoping to work on in the next couple of years is still a project around climate change, and still draws from some of the scientists I have met during this project and some of the artists I'm still in touch with, and how all of that experience still feeds into a lot of my creative practice. So here, these young people are actually measuring glacial melt. So we were on a glacier and we went up with the scientist who was actually going up to measure glacial melt. He'd planted that pole on that glacier in the winter, and we'd gone in the summer to see how much of that glacier had melted in one season. They literally, those numbers they were collecting formed a part of an actual journal paper that looked at glacial melt on that particular glacier in Svalbard in northern Norway. So a lot of the work was real science. And it's this idea of the feeding the creativity comes in sort of two directions. So we drew a graph of looking at how weather patterns changed, and the young people, because of the experiences they had sort of gone through over that time in the voyage of being on that boat for 2 weeks, they said, well, what would it be like if we represented a graph with just our bodies? You know, we wanted to use whatever we could find to represent some of those graphs. So it was really wonderful that what we were trying to, the tools we were trying to give the young people through our own creative practice kind of infiltrated their kind of everyday expression of things that they would be doing on a, you'd be drawing a graph with a graph paper and a piece of paper, a pen and a ruler, and that's what we do every day in science. We don't think about using our own bodies and to represent and interpret things. We did a lot of art. We went to this beautiful little place where there was a lot of, so the boat docked in a place where we knew there was a lot of sea ice. So we talked about these incredible structures that the Inuit community leave behind wherever they go called inukshuks. I know my son's doing that with his cubs today. They're all going to build inukshuks on a Zoom cub call. And this came up, so I just thought it was quite apt. And the young people wanted to, that we were with, we had 12 young people with us, wanted to create out of the sea ice they found, washed up, these inukshuks, because it felt like you were standing in a place of utter beauty. So they were standing behind it and looking out into the world that was in some way taking this inukshuk away. And the most bizarre thing was, after we'd built it, we stood around it, we took a photo, all of this disappeared because we watched a glacier carve off in front of us and created this almighty wave that kind of washed. We literally grabbed all the children and ran inland as far as we could, because I mean, that didn't stand very long because of literally watching a glacier carve off in front of us. As I said, they did a lot. This was a difference. So in 2008, we took 26 young people up to the Arctic from 7 different countries. So each of those children brought with them their own experience. And the idea of sharing so much of all of this with the young people that we took up to the Arctic was that you can express yourself in so many different ways. And they decided that they were going to pick a load of seaweed and create this palm because they felt that everything was in their hands. And they had the power of their voices to be able to do things in the world. And I found it hugely inspiring. And it's amazing how much of that feeds into it still stays with me. And I still think about this when I think about climate change projects and when we do workshops. I still draw upon all of this to feed my own process. And even little things like photography. I say it's little because we all take photographs, but it became a practice. It became a practice for me. I wasn't very good at it. I'm not very good at it, but it became a practice alongside my own practice, that even in the classrooms, when I'm teaching science, I'll bring some of these up. When I've been teaching, when I do climate change work, everywhere I went, I'm afraid my South Asian dance came with me. So I would choreograph. This was the first group of 12 young people. We did a South Asian salutation that we always do, a Bharatanatyam, which is a South Asian classical form that I'm trained in. I got them to perform this in a place called London on Svalbard, which is really amazing. And so for me, I kept bringing the dance in the South Asian dance. I can't imagine as much South Asian dance being performed anywhere in the Arctic. So it was really, for me, it was magical to see the young people share this with me, really. And again, this was us, the 26 young people we were with. We all resurfaced after traveling between Iceland and Greenland, where we started with 26 children sitting down to eat dinner. We all had our starter. By the time the main course came, I think there were about 2 of the young people still vertical. All of us were horizontal. We were literally horizontal because we were so seasick and there was nothing we could do about it. And I was supposed to be in charge of these young people, and there was no way I could look after them because we were all horizontal. We were so seasick. And this was us resurfacing after all this time. And really, I asked them what they wanted to do, and they wanted to do a dance workshop, and they wanted to do a South Asian dance workshop. And we got onto the deck of the boat. It was relatively calm, and we all did a little salutation and a bit of Bharatanatyam on the deck of the boat. We created a music orchestra, literally from an old whaling station we saw. We gave everybody drumsticks. We got one of the musicians, one of the artists with us was a musician. I learned so much about creating a junk orchestra. So we gave everybody drumsticks. I think the lad in the photo is playing a toilet bowl. Someone's playing something else. And it was the most incredible sound, and 2 of the girls could sing. So in the middle of nowhere, there were 2 girls singing. Everybody was playing this junk orchestra, and we have a recording of this most beautiful kind of moment. And a lot of the ideas came from the young people. We only had to feed little bits, and so much was inspired by them. I think one of the things that always will stay with me, and again continues to feed into my own practice, and I used to talk about a lot in the classrooms, was the communities we met. This is a Greenlandic community of 80 people, and we arrived, and suddenly, they hadn't seen so many people all arrive in one go in a ship, and we spent a lot of time. We had tea with them. We had all sorts of things offered to us, from something called muktuk, with this sort of beluga skin, which is a real delicacy. We got offered raw Arctic char that they eat, caribou in about 4 different forms, from frozen caribou to boiled caribou. I mean, it was just incredible. But I think the most important thing was listening to how their lives were totally and utterly affected. The elders knew where to go to hunt. They're hunter-gatherers, that's what they do, they eat caribou. And their lifestyles had changed so much. And we had a translator, and we listened to the young people tell us about where, can they go hunting? Is it safe? Who do they listen to? What does it mean to go hunting? And it was incredible. Artistically, I put this in because Max Eastley is a sound artist, and he one day didn't put that in, but he put a hydrophone into that water, and he recorded the sound of bearded seals. And I suddenly, after a few drinks on an evening, he played us the sound. We have a sort of big speaker that sort of puts the music out onto everybody in the boat. And I said, God, that is utterly beautiful. And I said, oh, that makes me want to choreograph something. And then that was it. I wasn't allowed to forget that. So I choreographed a piece of dance, which the filmmaker David Hinton helped me to create into a dance film, entirely based on that. And people talk about interesting audiences. And I had a bearded seal and a walrus swim up to the boat as I was performing because of the sound that was coming out the boat. It was incredible. But again, that still stays with me, and I still talk about it, and it still feeds this idea of what we mean by audiences, who sees work, who comes to see work, and, you know, what matters and what doesn't. I found it hugely inspiring to be with a whole bunch of different artists. And this is Dan Harvey trying to sculpt a lens out of ice. And he actually successfully sculpted a lens. And I sat and I watched. And it was just watching other artists see what I was seeing, but again, through slightly different lenses. This was me trying to create a dance film. You can see that there's a glacier in the background, and I've only got a short sleeve top on. There were two people holding my jackets for me. So I'd literally dance for 5 minutes, run in and came back. And it was, again, inspired by being in that space. The young people, what they saw, what they talked to me about, what they felt it meant to them being there. I remember taking a young lady from Chennai in South India. She'd never seen snow before. And to be there with her when she touched snow for the first time, again, I will always remember. So all of this inspired my own practice. And so I've been teaching science, so I left teaching, I was dancing for a long time, and then I went back into teaching when I moved to Buckinghamshire, and I live in Buckinghamshire, and I taught at my local state school for 5 years, 2 days a week. I only left in December 2019 when I got this job with Academy. And all the way through there, I was still creating work and touring on the other 3 days a week. And this piece was inspired by all of those trips. And it was many, many years later. It's a piece called Elixir, which is all about water. And it's also a result of me then becoming an artist in residence at the Environment Institute at UCL. So in terms of feeding practice, what I've found is that there've been little kind of almost installments of external input. So being an artist in residence at UCL, I sat in with loads of scientists, and the thing that came up time after time was water. So it felt normal for me to create a piece about water. So we worked with projections. I worked with Professor Mark Maslin at UCL, and he helped me to create this. And I sometimes in my classroom, when I used to talk about kind of water cycles and everything else, occasionally I'd show these photos. Just partly that there is a different way of seeing the world about the research that I had done. I'd been to India to do some research on water aid. And we use a lot of scientific equipment. So the back of this, on the back of the theatre, you'll see that's actually a clamp stand with a bit of scientific equipment where the water, you can actually turn the water on and it drips into a bowl. And at the end of the piece, we use the water in a bowl as a purification, as a sort of ritual. So we kind of talked about, and we'd have talks after every show where I'd bring in a scientist and we'd talk about the work. And I realized that I couldn't, through movement, show the beauty of every single drop of water. So I commissioned an artist who had just finished an MA at the University of the Arts to create a series of installations to look at the beauty of every single drop of water. And there's a little capillary tube coming out of that sort of old Victorian teapot, and it's on a slanted slope of glass. And what happens is that water collects up into as it moves down the glass. Underneath is a piece by Heraclitus, which the essence of the piece is that you never stand in the same river twice. And the idea that water just, you never encounter the same water twice when it's flowing water. And the only way you can read that text is by waiting for that water globule to travel all the way down that little piece of glass and for it to magnify the text. So it was hugely inspiring watching Josh Baum work. Now, I then made a piece about surgery. I went to a science festival, the Cheltenham Science Festival, and I watched a surgery simulation. So quite early on, I decided I was going to work with really interesting named scientists. So the first piece I ever made was around neuroscience, and I worked with a Professor Morten Kringelbach, and I'm not making that up. And then I decided to make a piece about surgery, and I worked with Professor Roger Kneebone. Again, I'm not making this up. So Roger was great. He had this inflatable operating theatre. And I was fascinated. I'm a failed medic. So when I did my A-levels, I didn't get my grade. So I went and did biochemistry, medical biochemistry, because I couldn't be bothered to retake my A-levels at the time. So I'm a bit of a failed medic. So I'm always watching any medical program. So when I saw Roger create this pop-up you know, operating theatre that pops up in 3 minutes. And then he works with surgical MSCs in surgical education students. So he runs his MSc. So he has these ready-made surgeons who basically do a trauma of someone who's just been stabbed coming in. There's blood everywhere. There's like a pig heart that he's got from, he worked with the Holby City sort of people who work with the kind of fake organs and stuff. So I looked at this and realized actually Bharatanatyam, which is hugely gestural, works incredibly well. So what you've got there are 2 of my dancers doing some research, doing some keyhole surgery on a pig stomach, I think. And it was literally part of our research, is we got our dancers, because I wanted them to know what it feels like, to feel those instruments, the minute nature of the movement. So we then created a piece of work afterwards called Under My Skin, which is they wear scrubs, and we looked at how do we magnify those movements into our bodies. So talking about how to feed our creativity, all the way through my teaching, a small period of it, I was actually a Senko for my faculty at the time. And a lot of the work I did at the time, the thing that stayed with me the most was self-harm and dealing with the young, at that time, mostly young women. I'm not saying boys don't do, but young women who self-harmed. It stayed with me for a really, really long time. And to the point where after I created 3 pieces of work, I decided that it's something I wanted to explore. I realized making a big theatre piece wasn't the way forward. So I got in touch with a good friend of mine as a child and adolescent psychiatrist, and I applied to be an artist in residence at one of the child and adolescent mental health services units in London. And I sat in and I had this one of the most humbling experiences of my life, listening to young people and sitting in on the kind of therapy sessions between psychiatrists and the young people, and you know, took all of that information, went away and decided to create an installation piece set in 2 shipping containers. And we actually ended up touring it to science festivals and did a huge amount of education work around that. And I was still teaching at the school in Princess Risborough, where I live, 2 days a week. So all of this was being done as I was teaching. I talk about it a lot, actually, during my lessons. And this was a piece in 2 containers. And the idea of the containers was, you know, they look very ordinary on the outside, like all of us do. But when you go in, the complexity that happens inside someone's head, a young person who's going through, you know, really complex issues, was what we were trying to show. So we have these kind of tubes of light that change color, that move. We had film, we had commissioned spoken word, and we literally picked up 2 containers and traveled around the country and placed them in places where there were science festivals, and we collaborated with the festivals to bring in as many young people as possible. We had lots of really interesting conversations with local psychiatrists, and it gave people a platform to talk. And it was a really intimate show. We could only have 25 people in at any one time. So I just made a list of the things that I've experienced or found that really has fed both my creativity and people, artists that I've worked with, and things that I've encountered over the last sort of 20 odd years. And one of the things I found really useful was residencies. I know it's difficult to get away when you're teaching. I know it's, you know, it's almost impossible, but anything that's taken me away and allowed me to immerse myself in something, however short a period of time, has continued to stay with me. So again, I got really lucky. 2 years ago, I applied to go on a 6-week residency to Sri Lanka. I was still teaching 2 days a week at my local secondary school. I went to the head teacher and said, listen, this will feed me as an artist, as a teacher in so many ways. Will you let me have half a term off? I will set every cover lesson. I literally sat and set up all the cover lessons for half a term of work for 2 days a week. I don't know how long that took me, how many sleepless nights of setting cover lessons, just in case they didn't get someone to kind of cover my work. So I set all the cover lessons and took half a term off and went to Sri Lanka, and that absolutely changed my life. I was immersed in a place and I was told, collaborate, make art, you have no pressure, but it's about being in the place that you're in and allowing that to feed you. I need to put that picture there because I made a dance film. I've never done that in my life. And I made a dance film on one of the artists there who's never done Bharatanatyam. And I filmed it on a beach, I filmed it on a railway track, and I filmed it on a really busy road in the south of Sri Lanka. Podcasts, another thing. I found some artists talking about that creative practice going into the structure of a podcast as being really interesting. I've spoken to lots of artists recently who just get together with a bunch of people and keep up practice, whatever that may be. If it's meeting once a week on a Zoom, just to share thoughts, creating an area for collaboration, and collaboration can mean anything. It could mean a once a week conversation. And I know a load of artists who I've been speaking to recently who also teach, who found that hugely beneficial and sharing practice. And design has been another one thing that I've heard a lot of artists talk to me about, and a lot of just people working within both sectors talk about, taking on design elements for things has been a real sharing of practice. And another thing I came across I wanted to share really recently was an oral history project we did at Academy, where young people collected stories from their grandparents about migration. And we had a bunch of teachers on one of those Zooms, but when we had the sharing, and there were 2 history teachers who suddenly said, gosh, this is so utterly fantastic. It's suddenly unearthed my own creative thinking about my own practice. Actually, what can I do with oral history stories? This is art centered around the voices of people, and giving the skills to young people to go away and collect that. And I had 2 history teachers on the Zooms really talking so much about what they were going to go back and do and how that's inspired them. We're about to create a piece about plastics and young people for Academy. Again, I've been really interested listening to lots of scientists talk about our world of plastics. And yeah, I'll stop sharing now. So that's just a little bit, it's a lot really, about the whole kind of practice that I've had over a whole period of time, and where there's been this sort of injection of different things to kind of keep my practice going, but at all times that, learning, participation, education has never been far away. Even when I was in Sri Lanka on that residency, I spent 2 days in a hospital working with young people with mental health issues and trying to get them to think about movement and music and writing and drawing. And it was just hugely inspiring. And again, I took so much from that. So yeah, I hope I've given you a little bit of, through my journey, different things that I hope might resonate with some of you. Thank you for listening. I hope you've got...
Gosh, Suba, thank you so much. There was so much to take away from that. That was amazing. What a life you've had so far already. And amazing. I'm so fascinated by the fact that you are a science teacher, but you have this huge creativity that has kind of enabled a kind of cross-curricular pathway for you, and that the science bit never seems to leave you, even though you're kind of really invested in your dance organization. Such amazing. And you say that you were a photographer. Those photographs were pretty something. They were amazing, really beautiful. I wonder if anybody would like to ask you any questions, if there's anything in the chat box, or just getting some lovely comments. Actually, Sava, my colleague, said she was hypnotized by your images because I asked her a question and she didn't answer it for ages. Would anybody like to ask Suba a question outright, or would you like to put something into the chat box? I'm really interested actually in the talk that we had before. Pat was talking about this hybrid practice between your creativity and your work as an educator, and you have completely consolidated those 2 things of and you're not a creative arts teacher, which is really quite something. So you've added in a kind of 3rd element into that. Did that happen quite organically, or did you kind of work towards that?
Quite organically, actually, because I found it's amazing, because if education is such a big part of what I've done for so long, for over 20 years, I never feel far away from it. So with everything I do, there's always that element of, okay, is there something we can do with, would this be something we can do with younger people? Could this be something we do with older adults? Could we tailor make something that around conceptually what we're creating with, whether it's something we can work with special needs, children with special needs, there's always, everything is always connected. So for example, with the plastics project, I'm already starting to think about, well, one of the big things for us is, can we make it accessible to children with hearing impairment or deaf children? Like, how can I look at, you know, choreographically materials? Can I, you know, can I ask everybody to come with a plastic bottle and look at the science of it? But what sounds can it make? Can the young people wear something that allows them to feel the vibration of the sounds that come, you know, that we create? So I think it's never far away, and it's so embedded in my practice with all the things I do that I never quite separate them out.
And clearly you've got you've got lots of courage to enable these things to happen, to go off to the Arctic, and also to go to your head teacher and say, I'd like to have a 6 weeks residency, and could you give me the time off? You know, that does take courage, doesn't it, to put yourself out there and to enable that to happen. And I think you know, you're often so bogged down in your teaching and what you've got to deliver, and the pressures from, you know, so many different areas of a school, that to think about what's going to benefit you in your personal practice and your professional practice, and to then go to your senior leadership team and say, you know, present what's going to happen is takes a lot of courage. And I personally feel like I could have benefited a lot from that in my teaching, and I wonder whether anyone in the room would also feel that, you know, that's how would you guys feel about going to your head teacher and saying, could I have 6 weeks off to do a creative residency? I think it's a really good thing to do. I can see lots of smiles, but nobody adding anything.
But actually, in the first voyage I went, I asked for 2 weeks off, full 2 weeks off, and my head teacher gave it to me fully paid. I couldn't believe he gave it to me fully paid. And this is the man who we all feared as a head teacher. Like, nobody ever talked to him unless we really desperately had to. Sorry if I've offended any head teacher out there. And he said, but what you bring back will be massive. And actually, in the end, when I organised the young people's voyage, the first one, we took a young person from that school. I also took a science teacher from that school. I couldn't go on that voyage because I was touring on the one after, but the science teacher who was there went along on one of the voyages to help create science material, and we created these videos that you could still find on the Cape Farewell website that you can use for teaching. So actually that school benefited hugely. They were in the media a lot because the kid who'd been, and you know, the media attention the school ended up getting was huge. So I'm just saying that just in case that is another way to sell anything you might want to do to your school, is whether the kind of long-term benefit. At that time, it was a long time ago, I completely admit, but at that time it felt appropriate.
Yeah, and I think you know, creating a legacy as well that can be kind of carried on, you know, for years to come, as to, you know, an experience that the children had, or a teacher had, or a school had, and the kind of hype around that. There's a lot to be said for that, I think, isn't there? You know, especially when you're trying to convince senior leadership team that, you know, you want to do something and it's going to cost X, Y, and Z. There are always pots of money to be found in different places, and if you can persuade them that this is going to have a benefit to the school that's going to have some longevity, then, you know, that puts you in a good place, doesn't it, to get what you want.
Exactly. I know there's a question here around the Arts Council's creative partnerships is one of the partnership projects. One of the ways I'd say is, so for example, the Arts Council has a develop your creative practice grant at the moment. You know, you can apply, and it's taken over from the international bursary scheme that they used to have. So sometimes it's worth just looking at ways in which even if the partnerships aren't there, if you know organizations you could partner with, but all you need is the funding sometimes. So it's worth just looking at lots of different little pots of money that might allow teachers or practitioners or educators who kind of straddle different areas to look at how they can create something for themselves that allows all of those different factors to feed into something you want to do.
My colleague Sava has on the Festival Bridge account has said that you know, we find that many organisations will be keen to partner with schools for projects for longer term. We find that this comes from developed relationship with the school and the organisation. But contacting your local bridge, there's 10 bridge organisations around the country. We are the one for East Anglia at Festival Bridge, but we can put you in touch with your local bridge organisation, and they'll be able to help you make the connections with partnerships if you want that kind of investment, or you want to partner with somebody for your school. And my other colleague, Abby, is saying about we often get schools working on their Artsmark awards saying that teachers in subjects such as science and geography can't see the relevance of art and the arts. So she's going to say she's going to be referencing you in the future for this kind of cross-curricular approach, which is so important. And I think it happens in primary a lot more, but in secondary, everybody's very protective and separate in their departments, aren't they? And don't want to do that kind of sharing in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, when in the first school I taught at for about 7 years, it's that teacher who, the head of science, that I sent off on one of those Cape Farewell voyages, which quite rightly someone pointed out that, yeah, they're not doing those voyages at all anymore. A lot of the work now is about thinking about climate change through more local artistic practice and sort of artists who are really interested in working with climate change as a conceptual sort of inspiration to create work. So it's Cape Farewell and they've moved to Dorset, and where they've got, you know, it's about sustainability. So much of their work has shifted from these voyages, but a lot of what happened during those voyages still feeds into what's going on today, as far as I know. But the head of science used to quite regularly get me to choreograph dances on various science sort of topics. So Mike, bless him, used to say, right, what's our current sort of science, what we're focusing on? Can you choreograph a piece of dance about DNA? We want to do something around DNA, we're doing something. Blah, blah. So I'd go and choreograph it, and it would be quite normal in that school to have a dance piece about DNA choreographed by me, and everybody kind of knew that it was a dance about DNA with me, because I kind of went on so much about, you know, my own practice, but not my own practice, but sort of dance being really important thing, you know, a really interesting tool to talk about science. So it's also how other members of staff, and I found this is really important, you know, not everybody, in my last school, we have a massive dance studio and we have a massive dance department, but the dance teacher rarely engaged with me at all to bring in South Asian dance. They had me for free, they could have had anything, but they didn't engage. So it's very much around what I've noticed. It's managing to tell the senior management that's important.
I think, and also tapping into the creativity of other teachers is really key. You might not know that the you know, that the maths teacher is an amazing bassoon player, or the year 3 TA is a you know, a fantastic painter. You know, it's finding out, isn't it, about the passions of teachers and their creativity, and how you can feed that into your own creativity and for those of your children and young people.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Suba. That was really fantastic. If anybody would like to get in contact with Suba, you can find on her website, which is academy.org.uk. Is that right, Suba? .co.uk. Or you can come through us at Festival Bridge through our website. Once again, if you were here before, if you wouldn't mind going into the chat box, clicking onto the Jamboard and just writing a sticky note about one positive thing you have taken away from today's session, that would be really fantastic. And thank you to those of you who came to both of the sessions today. Thank you to those of you who came to just this session. And we really hope to see you later on in the week with the rest of our Native Creatives programme. So thank you once again. The Jamboard is in the chat box, so is the Academy website. Thank you very much. Nice to see you all.